Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us on the final day of the Learning Tech Autumn Forum for 2025. My name is Hannah Frame and I'm a Finance People Capability Manager at an engineering company, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to one of the final sessions of this year's Autumn Learning Forum. And what an amazing couple of weeks it's been. I've just come from a brilliant session earlier today with Helen and Mike discussing how to measure the impact of mentoring. But also this year, we've covered everything from exploring how to rethink learning tech in the age of AI, through to how you can unleash your inner L&D hero and finding courage in these uncertain times. And if you missed any of these sessions, then they'll be available to watch through the Scopcord app. But I'm super excited to introduce today the topic for this session, as it's a hot topic of conversation at the moment. And to no surprise, it's all around how AI has made it easier than ever to produce polished output, but without necessarily building the skills behind them. So for us as L&D leaders, this raises a critical question on how do we ensure that learning remains credible, applicable, and worth the investment of time. So in this exciting fireside chat today, we'll be talking about the proof is in the process, all around AI, alignment, and the credibility of learning with Julie White and Zandy Wright from edX Enterprise. edX Enterprise offers certificate learning opportunities developed by world-class universities and industry-leading companies. So I'm delighted to introduce them both. Julie is the Director of Organisational Development at edX, where she leads initiatives to strengthen leadership development, employee engagement, and organisational effectiveness. And Zandy, the Director of Learning Strategy, guiding the underlying instructional philosophy and quality of edX's many online courses and programmes. And together they'll explore how aligning incentives between learners, educators, and organisation reduces shortcuts and strengthens trust in the process, and how creating the right organisational conditions helps employees and teams prioritise development despite our day-to-day pressures. So during the session, you are unable to unmute, but please do use the chat panel or the Q&A section for any questions during the session. And there'll be an opportunity to go through these throughout and also at the end. And you'll also notice there are some polls which are already live that we referred to throughout. So please do go ahead and answer these now. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Julie and Zandy. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's great to be here with all of you. Good morning from the US, and hello to everybody in other time zones. And so, yes, Julie and I are, let's see if I can advance us one click further. There we go. So as we said, Julie and I are both from edX. Julie's role is internal L&D, organizational development focused. My role is learning quality, but focused on our offerings to others outside of the organization. And so we wanted to kind of bring both of those perspectives into conversation today. We've had, Julie, some really lovely, for me, just discussions about some of these topics over the last couple of weeks, and wanted to kind of bring everyone here into that conversation as well. So I'll start us off by just addressing in the sort of the academic world, the academic side of learning design, there has, of course, over the last few years been lots of focus on academic integrity and AI. And how do we know if a learner actually did the work themselves or if they outsourced it in a way that we think diminishes their learning? And of course, in a workplace context, we don't call this academic integrity, right? Academic is not the point. And we probably don't even necessarily call it cheating, but that doesn't mean that it's not a consideration. Did this learner actually learn the thing? And how do we think about the role of effort versus potentially AI shortcuts? So Julie, can you start us off by just sharing a little bit of your perspective as an L&D expert about what does this look like in an organizational setting?
Yeah. Thanks, Sandy. Sandy and I have been having a lot of rich conversations about this topic, so super excited to bring it to all of you. And as L&D professionals and working in the corporate world, I'm sure a lot of you are seeing that we're having frank conversations with our employees. We're encouraging them to dabble in AI and utilize different technologies to improve the way of working. And so I'm sure this, causes some concern of like, how do we get learning that's credible and to our employee population? So when I'm thinking about AI and the shortcuts, I see this every day in our interactions. We're going into meetings. We have a prompt that says, do you want to, do we lose our slides? Do we, okay. Do we want to transcribe this meeting for all of us? And so we all just can engage in conversation and let AI take the notes for us. And from that, what I often hear is, oh, I hope AI is getting this down correctly. And I think that point of, I hope AI is getting this down correctly is reminding us that we cannot take the human element out of AI, that we actually have to look at those transcriptions and make sense of what it's telling us. And I'll often, go into my inbox and I'll extract that transcript. I'll see that it's, giving me some action items of who said what, or but is it accurate? And so that's where I just really want to emphasize throughout this session that credibility, making sense of what is AI telling us, is really aligning with our values of what we're trying to accomplish in our initiatives. So that's one way that we're thinking about the AI shortcuts. Another area that I was thinking about was, that I hear in the workplace is that we should be creating AI agents. We should have our assistant through the AI technology helping us improve the way we're working. And again, within our technology, I'm sure within your organizations, you're having those assists. Like, how can you, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or pick your AI tool, but creating those agents to feed information to say, how can I improve this process? And so that will continue to be that challenge for us, that we want to make sure that we're creating these shortcuts for our employees of how do we create, make this process and reduce it to, 10 steps to 5 steps. But that human element needs to come into play to say, does this really make sense for the way that we need to work, the interaction, the environmental factors that need to be considered? AI doesn't know all of those other factors.
Mm-hmm.
We can feed it and we can keep asking and refining it, but can you then just take some of that information and engage in human connection to say, how is this really going to work? So those are just a few ideas or a few thoughts that I've been thinking about of, how can we assess these shortcuts and not think about, and continue to think about that human effort, that it needs to go hand in hand.
Yeah, I love that. And I absolutely am a person who will turn on the AI transcription in a meeting and sort of feel, the relief of like, okay, I can stay hopefully focused and grounded in this conversation and just have a good discussion and know that the AI is taking notes. And also then sometimes that means that, in the back of my mind, I'm going, well, I don't have to sort of commit to memory what were my action steps out of this, because I know that the AI will tell me later. And there is a little bit of that sort of cognitive offloading that can happen, which, in a learning context, can sometimes raise the question of, is that productive cognitive offloading? Are we, creating more space for me to be more present in that conversation, or for a learner to sort of be more attentive to the specific thing that they're, focused on, and reducing kind of their cognitive load? Or is that sort of using something that's more like a shortcut that then actually means I'm not paying attention to the things that I should be paying attention to in terms of that conversation or that learning process?
Yeah. And I think that the key word when I keep looking at this slide is AI trust and human skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so AI, like the credibility of what AI is producing, can we trust that? And does it really, can it take the human element? Does it have understanding and meaning? And AI doesn't. So that's where we just have to continue to remind ourselves that it's giving us an output, but we need to still think critically. And I think that's the message when we are talking about AI, like, is AI going to take over this? And it's like, AI is not going to be able to think critically and infuse the emotion. And when we think about trust, is, even going back to that example of how can I improve this process? that, what is the impact that it's going to have on other people in the organization when we say, oh, we're going to have this change initiative, but here's the process, here are the steps, but that human element of how is this going to impact the employee population when we need to integrate this and implement it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I've heard you talk about that before. The idea that we still need humans to own the impacts, to own how will this land for other people. I think for me, part of that also is that you can't hold an AI accountable, right? You can't sort of go back to it and say you got this wrong, and I need you to make amends, because it doesn't have that capability, right? So we as the humans in the loop need to be the ones who are accountable and who are still sort of upholding that trust with our colleagues, with our customers. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. So now let's, kind of continue down that path of, we're encouraging our employee population to leverage AI in the flow of work and become more efficient in how, we're teaching and training practices need to adapt to the world where AI is widely available and difficult to police. So thinking about, this is in our day-to-day, but Zandy, how can we start to police this a little bit better?
Yeah, really good question. And yes, as I said, of course, a lot of the particularly the first conversations that we were having in learning spaces about AI were really focused on that idea of policing. And we're starting to see some shifts, I think, away from that and a little bit more towards treating it as a tool. But so for me, what that looks like is, pre-ChatGPT launch in 2022, we could make a reasonable assumption, not 100% of the time, but that if a learner produced a quality product, if, to use sort of a traditional example, if they turned in, a successful essay on the assigned topic, we could make a reasonable assumption that then they must have gone through the required steps to get there, or at least that somebody went through the required steps to get there, right? That hopefully the learner wrote their own essay, but at least some human sort of went through the thought process if the result was successful and met the criteria, met the learning objectives. And now, right, we have to separate process and product a lot more than we used to, because now AI can just create a convincingly polished, essay, for example, is a very common way that this shows up, but it can create convincingly polished lots of things with very little learning required to kind of get to that outcome, which means we need to actually, as educators, take a step back and be more intentional about how we're supporting and evaluating the learning process more directly, rather than just skipping to, if you show me the outcome, then I trust that you went through the process. This is actually just good learning design in general, because this makes us sort of more accountable to things like effective scaffolding of how does an expert actually approach this task, not just here's where you're trying to get to, figure it out. And it sort of pushes us to create authentic assessments using real world conditions, so that the process of going through those steps of the process will be practice for the real thing, either the workplace applications of it, or other sort of outside of the learning environment instances. So as educators, we have to challenge ourselves to think less about how do I keep them from using AI, and even I think it's sometimes I hear, okay, so I can't keep them from using AI, but how can I know whether or not they used AI? And unfortunately, the answer to both of those questions is sort of like, at the end of the day, you kind of can't, right? We are in a world where these tools are widely available. For employees, right, we can absolutely set appropriate policies about, and for learners too, about how they should be using AI, and especially around things like not putting sensitive data into AI tools, not sort of exposing the organization to different risks around that. But AI detection is not a reliable source of information about whether people used AI, let alone how they used AI. So as educators, we have to think of that as one of the tools in people's toolkits and help to actually provide active training about what are the appropriate ways to use this? Where are the places where we need the human skills to still be front and center and not do that kind of cognitive offloading? And I'm seeing that in some of the responses to the poll about attitudes toward AI in folks' organizations, that we're seeing some cautious experimentation, I think, looks like the most popular response. Some restrictive guardrails still, some sort of like, stay within these very tight boundaries. I'm seeing a little bit of targeted training. And I think that that's probably the direction that we're starting to move. I think certainly in my world, in sort of the academic and like learning development or learning design, is thinking about, if we have a point of view about whether and how learners should be using AI for this skill, then communicate that as part of the learning experience rather than just focus on policing or enforcement.
Sandy, when I know we've been talking a lot about this topic, and I know this wasn't in my bio, but this has been also, front and center for me. In addition to working internally within 2U edX, I'm actually an adjunct faculty member for a university, and this has been one of the biggest areas that when I'm grading assignments, I have to, I'm looking and I'm making sure, are they responding to the assignment? Are they bringing in credible resources? And is it their language? And last night, I had a faculty meeting with my other position, and this was a topic that we had a presenter come in and talk to us about, of how are we managing AI in the classroom? And so this was, I'm seeing it in my day-to-day life. I'm seeing it when I'm teaching in the evenings. But this is, we can't not talk about it. And we have to, I'm looking at keywords on this slide again, and it is that policing. And I heard that last night in our discussion with my peer faculty members. And it's becoming harder. But Sandy, you had mentioned, some of those AI detection tools, they're not necessarily credible. Mm-hmm. But what I was hearing from some of my peers last night was, some of the students, they're not even reading their work that they're extracting from mm-hmm. AI. And it will have a prompt in their essay saying, do you want me to elaborate on this? Do you want mm-hmm. me to refine? And I know, as a professor, I will just stop reading, and but it's, how do you manage that in the classroom setting? How do you educate your students, your learners, on how to properly use it? And it does go back to what you were saying, and even in the chat, of targeted training, how are we educating? We can't not address it. We have to get in front of it. And I know, and that's where, for me, living in both worlds, in the L&D world and in the corporate environment, that we want to encourage, and we'll be in meetings, we'll be in facilitated learning live sessions and say, feel free to ask chat, mm-hmm. This question, or ask AI this question. But it's bringing it in, you can use it to brainstorm. You can use it to maybe help synthesize some data, but it still needs to be that human element to, how am I reading it to be able to put my voice? And that's the other piece too, that I think we're seeing, that is AI talking the way mm-hmm. that we would, is it using our own voice? So that's a nice little reminder too, that if I'm asking AI a question, I need to put my tone, my voice to it, and not just allow, I'm going to regurgitate what it just told me.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that brings me actually, I think, into the next kind of theme that we wanted to explore a little bit, which is this idea of sort of aligned incentives. Part of the goal with some of the teaching practices, and sounds like the conversations that you were having with your other faculty colleagues, is just to get I think, better alignment between what what are the behaviors that we're trying to drive in students or in learners or employees. In the case of say undergraduate or even graduate students, maybe we want them to actually do the readings and actually, think about and excuse me, and talk about the ideas that are coming up for them. And so we need to set up the incentives in a learning design experience so that there's clear alignment between what learners think is important, what faculty or course designers think is important to learn, and ultimately, what's going to be important outside of that learning experience. An example that I use for this a lot is, so sometimes I haven't been doing this as much as I should, but sometimes I go to the gym and I swim laps at the gym. And that takes some time out of my day, and it's like a time investment. And so, somebody could come to me and say, Zandy, I'm going to save you so much time. I just, invented this robot that's going to swim your laps for you. And I, that would not be helpful to me, right? Because this is not a problem of somebody needs to swim those laps and I can just outsource it to someone else. For me, there is a very clear benefit to me actually going through that process, even though it is a time commitment, even though there is effort involved. And so I think, when we see learners doing the thing of, let me just drop this prompt into the chat and take what comes out and plop it into my paper or my assignment, or, in more of a workplace setting, let me ask ChatGPT for advice and then just turn that into my work product. Often to me, what that signals is like misaligned incentives for that learner or that worker compared to what we're asking them to do, like the behaviors that we're trying to get them to actually go through. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of these cases in a learning environment, right, ultimately, if we've designed the environment correctly, those kinds of shortcuts actually are harming the learner or the employee and their ability to be effective in their role or to accomplish their goals more than anything else. An example of this alignment in more of like a workplace example might be training future phlebotomists how to do a successful blood draw, right? That the program, the instructor, the learner, the industry, everybody wants the same thing, which is a phlebotomist who can do a successful blood draw and do it well and feel confident and competent in doing that. And so there's no incentive, in my opinion, for a phlebotomist in training to cheat or outsource parts of that task, because they know that this is the same task that I'm going to be doing in the real world. So let me learn how to do it using the right tools in the right ways that I'm going to need to do on my own later. And that's all well and good for a phlebotomy program. Most of us are probably not working on those. So in a workplace L&D environment, there's a lot more complexity. There's a lot more different stakeholders whose incentives need to align. And Julie, one of the specific challenges that you and I have talked about is when in a workplace setting, when maybe managers have different incentives than their direct reports for what kinds of training to provide or what to focus on in terms of, am I training this person to just be very skilled at their current job so that we are all being successful together, or am I prioritizing opportunities for this person to move up and potentially leave my team? So in a workplace setting, in the work that you're doing, how do you think about this idea of sort of incentive alignment and getting to a place where employees are not just able, but they're encouraged to prioritize their ongoing learning and sort of internal mobility or operations for growth and not just success right now in this role?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely starts with a learning organization. And how are you cultivating that environment that you want to encourage your employees to engage in learning content? And so as managers, are you modeling the behavior? I know that is an area that I am, what is the problem that I'm seeking to solve is when I'm offering different learning initiatives, who's showing up? And I'll do some reporting and look at some data to see, from different groups, what employee population am I seeing? Groups in tech show up at the learning interventions? Am I seeing, finance, operations, and then what level? And, the area that I am seeing that I need to get more of our learners in the classroom engaging in learning initiatives is our management group, our leaders, our managers, our frontline managers. And so I'm still trying to crack the nut there of what is it, what's holding them back. And it does come back to this time. And so educating, if we want to create this learning environment, this learning organization, that our leaders need to model it, and we need to allocate the time and space for our learners to develop. But I think, Sandy, what you had mentioned earlier, I love the swimming laps of, oh, I created this robot to do this for you. And, what is that going to do for me to grow and develop and, learn and get stronger if I have somebody else do it for me? And so we need to, what is the goal? What are the objectives of what we want our employees to move towards? So if we're assessing, how are they performing today? And what are the things that we need to put in place to be able to help them develop further? So as an L&D professional, oftentimes I might get, a call, an email, and say, oh, can you pop in to one of our team sessions and, talk on this topic? And I'm not an order taker. I am going to engage in the conversation to say, well, what are we trying to solve for here?
Mm-hmm.
What is the behavior that you're noticing that needs to be addressed? And it might take a couple of conversations to get the requester to understand, like, oh, I just want to do some team development and I want to get the group together. And I'm like, okay, but what are we trying to solve? And that's, going back to the aligning of incentives of, if we're engaging in development for a reason, and are we trying to deliver on results? So what does that look like? And then how are we incentivizing our employees to actually do the thing? And so another model that I'm sure a lot of you use this same approach of the 70-20-10 approach to development. And, the reason why I bring that up is, people are learning all day long, and we just have to let them know that they're learning. And so the 70% of, learning transfer happens on the job. And so how are we creating those moments that are teaching moments? And as managers, thinking about somebody who's taking on a new task, how am I setting them up for success? Am I reminding them? Am I giving them the steps on how to, produce that, step-by-step process, or, go into the system and, do the task? And then am I encouraging? Am I providing support? So that's all in the on-the-job learning experience. Are there job aids that we're providing them? So just keeping with this mindset of, we don't necessarily have to create dedicated time, but I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But reminding, in order for us to create this learning organization, reminding the organization of how that shows up. And so 70% of our learning happens on the job. And this is what it looks like. It's going to happen through, are we creating job aids? Are we creating resources or providing resources for people to learn to be able to accomplish new responsibilities, new tasks? And then that 20% is when, how are we setting up mentor relationships? How are our managers coaching in the moment to be able to provide feedback on how someone's performing? I was just in a conversation with a senior leader the other day, asking about, one of their senior level employees and how they're performing. And they were asking us as, HR professionals, but I'm like, how are you having the conversation in the moment? And so that's that 20% that we have to engage in development, intentional development conversations, and take advantage of those teaching moments. And so how are we looking out into the landscape of our organization and saying that we're doing this? And what does that look like? And letting people know what's happening. And so we should be talking about these learning experiences. And then the last part, which as a learning professional, I always look at this statistic and say only 10% of our learning happens through the work that a lot of us do day in and day out. And so that would involve like our live instruction, maybe our e-learnings that we're providing. And so that's that formal learning initiative. And it's only 10%. So when we have our employee population say, I want professional development, and I'm like, well, what does that look like for you? Because I'll point out all of these opportunities that happen throughout the day. Like I had mentioned, on the job training, the 20% of mentoring and coaching. And then finally, here's a list of our courses. These are our offerings. And that's only 10% of what can help them through their development. But with that 10%, I think it's important to how can we create the priority for making sure that people are engaging in that content and they're taking time for development. And so a couple of things that we've done within our organization is we'll have learning hours. And so these are something that people know that are happening once a month. And those learning hours are put on employee calendars. They're not mandatory. They're just a reminder of here are some topics that we are going to be presenting on. But what we need for that learning organization is for our managers to encourage people to attend. And so from that data that I had mentioned earlier, how are we sharing that data back to our leaders to say, hey, we've offered these topics in our learning hours and only 10% of your team is attending? Is that the number that we're striving towards? And as a L&D professional, I have a number. I have a target of how many people I want to be attending these learning hours. But we need that partnership with our management group, our leadership group, to encourage development, because I'm sure a lot of you have the employee engagement questions, and what comes back is people want more professional development. But what does that look like? And are people engaging in it? And so I think that's building and aligning us incentives to build trust in the learning process. Is we can offer a slew of resources, but we need that partnership with our leadership to encourage people and create the space and time for them to engage in the learning initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the as a learning designer, right? It's always a little crushing to be like, it's 10%, but like the integration of that into how is the work actually happening, right? How is the learning transfer concept? How is this actually showing up in your day-to-day? And what kind of sort of supporting or reinforcing feedback and coaching are you getting in that 20%? I think I love that focus. One thing I'm noticing that in our poll that we'd asked about how's your organization using or thinking about skills-based training, and I'm not surprised to see this, but like I think this is maybe naming part of the challenge, is that we have a pretty low percent saying that we're equipping managers to notice and support employee skill opportunities. To say as your manager, like, oh, I noticed that there's an opportunity here for you to develop more in this skill. Let me, suggest some resources. Let's have a coaching conversation about that. And that part is hard, right? It's Julie, I heard you talk about this sort of emphasis on trying to get managers into some of those like learning opportunities a little bit more than you're currently seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Do you? Yeah. And thanks for pointing out the kinds of skills and that team and organizational leadership and peer and interpersonal collaboration skills. I'm seeing that a lot also. And I think it is what I keep referring to as that interaction model, because a lot of our organizations are working in a matrix environment. And so how are we equipping, teams, matrix teams, to work more effectively together? So that is, I'm happy to see that I'm not the only one who is, really focused in on that area too.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like we got a question from Rachel about your comment, Julie, about those learning hours. So In those learning hours, what learning do you put into those? Where does that request come from? Or how do you identify like what are the learning needs? Is that coming from the business, from employees?
Yeah, it's definitely coming from the business, and we'll, crowdsource, we'll solicit some, ask questions, whether it's in the learning hour, what are some other skills and topics that you're interested in learning, having conversations with our leaders to identify like what is current state, what's future state in terms of performance, and then what are those areas, what are the gap areas. The other piece that I will say from, looking at other data sources, and, we have like edX courses that our employees have access to. So I'll look at like, what are the courses that they are engaging on that platform and even other platforms. And so I'll pull a lot of data, because for our kind of our power users of like, I want to invest a lot of time in my development. And so I'll see what those topics are. And probably we offered an AI course last February, or this year, February. And the reason for that was I looked at these other data sources. I was like, oh my goodness, look at all of our employees that are taking courses on edX around AI. Mm-hmm. So we took that opportunity and offered actually 2 learning hours around the usage of AI to debunk of like some of the myths within the organization of, oh, should I be sneaky on how I'm using AI? But we wanted to get in front of it and talk about, how can we respectfully, carefully use AI in the workplace. So we definitely look at, a couple of different data sources, and I'm engaging in a lot of conversations with our leaders. The other area within development plans, we're in the process of doing some talent reviews. And so as I'm doing that, I'm asking the questions around like, what are the behaviors that this individual, like they're doing well in job, but what are the areas to help them progress in role? And the example that I was sharing earlier around having a conversation with one of our executives and their leaders, and he kept talking about, they're lacking strategic thinking. And, so I'm sure as a learning professional, it's like, okay, so what would that look like? Yeah. What are the behaviors that you would want to see more or less of from this individual? So I do a lot of, conversation. So qualitative, extracting information from surveys of what are the types of skills, we'll sprinkle that out. And then we do, last year, we had a calendar of all of the learning hours. This year, I, kind of thought quarter by quarter of what are those learning hours for individual contributors, and then what are the learning hours for managers. So we do separate the two. We want to make sure that there's learning space for our individual contributors and then specific ones for managers. And then, sometimes we'll offer both. Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And actually that sort of leads us really nicely into some of the other things that you and I have been thinking about and talking about, Julie. So, part of this emphasis on aligned incentives that we were just talking about is being more transparent with learners about what they're learning and why they're learning it, and making sure that to Rachel's question, that we're sort of offering the right skills, the right opportunities for development, the things that people need, either based on what you're seeing that people are opting into in edX courses or based on feedback from managers. So just making sure that we have that sort of the alignment about what are the skills that people need, what does that look like. Mm-hmm. And this in other learning design contexts, can also show up in terms of having really clear like learning pathways where we can see, if I'm starting out here, that could get me to over here or this direction, or there's different places that I can take this. So in terms of that visibility and the emphasis on skills, one of the tools that we're finding really impactful for this is really moving towards a skills-based course catalog. You mentioned this a little bit, Julie. So using we have an industry validated skills taxonomy. The one that we use is Lightcast. There are others out there. And to me, this is a place where the formal training, that 10% that you talked about, and the employer needs, the needs of the business, can really go hand in hand if employers can see what are the skills that the organization actually needs, and then tie that to either specific employees, specific candidates, or to upskilling resources. What are the training opportunities that we're providing? So how is this showing up for you in your role? I mean, we've talked extensively about this, but I would love to bring folks into this conversation as well. I know you've been thinking about this a lot recently in terms of some projects to more explicitly map out skills across the organization to help people kind of see those, like the career trajectories, the opportunities in a more visible way.
Yeah. And yes, absolutely. This is all day long. I get excited about this, and I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm looking at resources of how to make those connections. So what I find with our employee population is we need to give them some of the recipe for success, if you will, of what is it going to take for me to advance in my role? And we talk a lot about like our career ladders. What's the career path for someone from staff to senior staff, or what it would look like within their domain? And then what is internal mobility? And so this thought of visibility is so top of mind for me, because our employees should know how to advance in their career. And, is it the job of the learning professional, or is it the job of the manager to, make sure that that is visible, they're having those conversations? And I think it's a combination of both of us. So from L&D, we should make sure that we are having those resources so people know how to upskill. But it will take the manager and the employee to talk about, like, what is the performance expectation for the job? And so something that we're going to be kicking off early next year, and we're kind of in development right now, is even thinking about our setting performance expectations at the beginning of the year. And, in addition to goals, but what does it look like to perform in my job well, and engaging in that conversation? So with that, what are the skills that need to be developed? And so how are we mapping those skills to some of our course offerings? And so a couple of ways that we're doing that in preparation for how are we linking skills to learning initiatives, learning offerings, is we have a competency model. We have a competency model for our individual contributors and our leadership levels. And we've curated a list of, so in our competency guides, we have like, what are the competencies? What are the behaviors that need to be represented for these competencies? And then at the kind of the appendix is a learning map. And so from that learning map, that 70-20-10 model that I had mentioned, of how do I develop in those areas? And so the 10%, we've curated all of our competencies to our edX courses. We have live instruction that we've offered or will offer. And so we want to make sure that our employees know that if I'm engaging in a conversation with my manager, and my manager says, critical thinking, this is an area that I have recognized that I would like for you to develop, and they come to an understanding of what that looks like. And then the manager and the employee, it's like, okay, so how do I develop in that area? And so we want to make sure that we're providing resources to say, hey, start here. Mm-hmm. The other piece that we're, from, I'm sure your LMS, there might be some capability of how do you upload some skills. And so one of the technologies that we've also launched is a skills cloud. And so from that would be individual, inputting the skills that they are recognizing that they either have today or that they want to develop. And so from that, we're going to be running some reports of what are the skills that our employees are saying that they want to develop in, and or they have, and we want to continue to strengthen those skills. In addition to that will be, what are the skills by position?
Mm-hmm.
And so individuals can put in Skills Cloud, like, these are the skills that I feel like I demonstrate in myself. But then what are the skills for the positions that I'm seeking to move towards? And so then they can say, oh, I have this skill, I have that skill, but this one in particular, this is an area that I need to develop in order to be considered to move into this role. So that visibility of, are we showcasing the skills that are necessary for career mobility? And so taking the guessing game out of it. So that's what we're trying to do with, putting skills into Skills Cloud. But I'm sure for, L&D professionals, nothing's mandatory. And so it's getting individuals to put those skills in and managers to validate that those skills are represented in this individual, or they're progressing in this, or this is a development opportunity. So the question of going back to, how are we going to identify our learning hour topics and even some of our course offerings, Skills Cloud is going to help us do that. Our talent acquisition team is going to be able to look at, what are skills that people have today that are emerging jobs that we're going to need. And so how can we, maybe for workforce planning, give them a prompt to be like, hey, here's a job you might be interested in. So we're not quite there yet, but that's the hope. And then going back to course offerings, if we have these skills that are visible, then we'll be able to just continue to remind people that these are learning opportunities to develop in those areas.
Yeah. And I think that's, for me, that visibility, the ability to say, here's where I am now. What are the other skills that I should or could be thinking about for where I'd like to move within the organization? Like that transparency, I think, it speaks to the alignment piece of aligned incentives for that employee wants to invest time in developing those skills. If they can see that there are opportunities within this organization that I can stay and grow here, and not feel like I'm going to have to look elsewhere, or sort of like explore other avenues necessarily, right? So that visibility and the ability to, as you said, take the guessing game out of it, right? To know like what actually are the things that I need to be able to do in order to move into a people management role, if that's what I want, or move into, maybe a lateral move into a different team that I'm really interested in. So I really love that it helps with the sort of the shared vision, right? Of where that individual might be trying to get to, but also how does that support the organization's goals as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even going like those learning pathways, what, we envision is like, as somebody goes on to the LMS, there'll be some recommended, courses for them to take. And, this will eventually be the AI, it's coming, of, what are my learning patterns that will start to make some recommendations of courses. We're not there yet, but what we, as, the L&D team, we're going to be creating those learning pathways and making some recommendations of, these are the courses that you can engage in for your development for that learning path. So that is something that we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And being able to connect those pieces, right? The skills in the organization, the skills, the opportunities, and the skills connected to those. And here are then the learning resources, the courses, or the opportunities that will actively help you develop those. I think is really powerful. Yeah.
All right. So we have one more question, and I know we're coming at time, and if there's, we can go into the chat and see if there's other questions that we can answer. But when we're thinking about AI and the HI, human interaction, and I often say, like, as a behavioral scientist, I know that humans are wired to connect. And so when we're thinking about technology and thinking about, how do we need to continue to remind ourselves of that human interaction? And I know from, if we offer an async learning module, individuals might go in there and they're engaging even in a role play that AI is going to respond to certain responses. But I'm really curious, Sandy, when you're thinking about learning design and learning strategy, how are you prioritizing those human interactions, the human capabilities with AI at the forefront, but how do we need to continue to remind ourselves of that human element and that human interaction, and just what I had mentioned a few seconds ago of humans have that need to connect, and how can we make sure that that continues to happen in the world of AI coming on so strong?
Yes. Yeah. I love this question. And, I think that it really starts with our own, as professionals and as educators, our own understanding of what is AI actually good at and good for, and what are the things where no, you do actually want a human being for that experience. So some things that we know that AI does really well, and that in a learning environment can actually improve not just scale, although scale is important, but can actually improve learning outcomes. One thing that we've seen is that humans, especially kind of early in a learning process, are much more willing to ask what they think might be a stupid question of an AI chatbot versus of a human being, right? It can kind of remove some of that expectation of what is this trainer going to think of me if I ask a question that I should already know the answer to? So we see actually a lot more sort of willingness to interact with and willingness to ask even sort of core foundational questions of an always available, non-judgmental chatbot sort of tutor resource as compared to a human tutor. Now, that doesn't, to me, say that, well, we don't need human tutors anymore. Absolutely, it doesn't. But it does mean that there's a real value in providing that as a resource, knowing that that's often how people will interact with it. Similarly, when we provide in a technical or a coding environment, when we provide assessments where learners, rather than you have to do the whole thing and then submit it to a human for grading, when we give them the ability to do a piece of it, submit that piece of it for automated feedback, and then continue working on the next piece, we saw that learners started, they submitted more frequently, smaller pieces. They were sort of tightening that feedback loop. In part, we think because again, they're not worried about whether the AI is going to judge them for the progress that they've made. They're more willing to submit something that's sort of a work in progress and get feedback on it. And they don't feel like they're sort of taking up a busy human being's time if they know that I'm just going to get automated feedback on what I've done so far. Both of those, part of the benefit of that AI tool is that the learners know that it's AI, right? To me, there's not a benefit there of let's, put in something that can do human-like things and sort of hope that people don't notice that it's actually not a human being, right? The benefit derives from people recognizing that AI is good for different things. And of course, on the flip side, right, there are still lots of places where that genuine human interaction has real value. You spoke to this, I think, early in the session, Julie, about the accountability, the actual lived experience, right? That AI does not, you can train it on data all you want. It does not have a lived experience. It does not experience consequences in the same way that human beings do. And so, if you're a student in one of our graduate programs and you're having a hard time, you're going through some stuff in your life, you might want to sort of talk some of that out with a bot potentially. But if what you want to know is should I be taking a leave of absence from this program because of the things that are happening in my life? Probably you want to talk to a real human about that, right? For most people, for me, I'll speak for myself, right? That ultimately, I want a person with genuine empathy based in lived experience, not something that can sort of convincingly fake it, right? So for me, this comes back to the idea that when we think about the sophistication of an AI tool, the Turing test is often used as a benchmark in sort of technical environments to measure how advanced a machine or an AI is based on its ability to convincingly mimic human behavior. And the test is, if a human evaluator interacted with an AI tool and with a human, would they reliably be able to tell which one is which? And for me, that's an interesting test for evaluating, how far have we come in AI capabilities, evaluating the sophistication of a particular tool. But it doesn't necessarily help us answer, for me, the question in a learning environment of, should we use AI here, right? Especially as it continues to be built into more and more things and people become more savvy consumers. I think that a lot of this question of, where do we use which one and how do we make those decisions is less about can the AI sort of convincingly fake humanness, and a lot more about being as transparent as we can about which one is which and why this is actually the right choice, right? Why is an AI tool a more effective resource, or maybe just a more available resource, but letting people know that that's what it is. And know and value and appreciate when they're actually truly benefiting from the real human interaction and the sort of shared experiences that come from that side of things.
And Sandy, I know when we talked about this of like the ethical piece of it too, of making sure that the student, the learner knows that you are engaging with an AI.
Yeah.
I know this week, there was the release of a journalist, an AI created journalist. And so there's, when you looked at that image, it's like, is that the human or is that the AI version of it? And so I think that academic integrity, what we started with, is going to be so important as, from our learners to make sure that they are engaging with that and having that human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I want to circle back. I know we have a few minutes, but I know that I went back to the question of what are those learning hours? And I responded to how are we getting the topics? But I know for me, whenever I go into these types of sessions, it's like, no, I really want to get more of the details. So I did pull up our learning hour calendar, and I'll just sprinkle a couple of topics that we offered this past year. We had strategic thinking, we had adaptability, accountability, goal setting, decision-making, judgment, problem solving, creativity, innovation, tool upskilling, which would be around the AI, active listening and adaptability, leadership agility, self-leadership. So just a couple of those topics. And as a reminder, like when I looked at this list too, they were all tied back to our competency model. So that's another way to make sure like what is relevant to what are your employee population needs. Hannah?
Thank you so much, Julie, Sandy. That was like an amazing session, and it was so insightful and great, kind of thought-provoking. The chat has been extremely active and extremely engaged. So thank you to all that are live with us now. There's been so many questions, and I'm conscious of time. So I think what might be best is just to kind of ask yourself, Julie and Sandy, how can people best contact you to kind of follow up on any questions they might have?
Great question. We didn't discuss that beforehand. I would say, feel free to find me. I'm quite easy to find on LinkedIn. I have a very distinctive name, which makes it hard to find the wrong one. And would love to be able to engage with folks in conversations about these topics in that space.
Yeah. And LinkedIn too. My name's pretty more generic. But if you connect with me and connect it to 2U, that's probably where you'll find the Julie at 2U. But yeah,
brilliant. Thanks.
We'd love to continue to engage. Yeah,
because lots of conversation around talking about how AI can be considered a reliable resource. So lots of conversations around that. How can we make sure it's not biased? How do we manage AI feeding off AI to create this data? Like so many great conversations, I think, as well around this human piece that you were just referring to at the end. Rachel mentioned move towards human connection as that AI hype starts to like die down. So having a real think about what is AI good at, but also what's it not good at, where we can really get that human need and that interaction. So thank you so much. And I just want to kind of signpost our final session, which is at 3:30 today with Martin Cousins, and it's follows on very nicely from this session, all around how you can think smarter and act faster in this thinking in the age of AI. So the session will explore a simple traffic light model to guide decisions, how to spot those hidden assumptions and biases that we're talking about today, how to frame claims before acting on them, as well as how to make AI your intellectual partner, which I know, Julie, you talked about at the beginning there around like, ask AI this question, but make it your thought partner, and rather than just like going to it for the answers and assuming they're right. So very timely session. So make sure you don't miss it. I know I'll definitely be there. But yeah, thank you both so much, and what a great session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.